Cheers.
Cheers.
Welcome to Founders Raw.
Yeah, thanks for the beer.
Well, first of all, John, I want to just kind of want to open with like thanking you guys for what you guys have done in the community. GeekWire just exceeded my expectations in the sense of like what it's done for the community. So, I want to thank you for that.
Thanks for reading. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, for sure.
It takes a village.
And help me as well. I do some guest posts and stuff. So.
Yeah, we love those. So keep them coming.
I will.
Yeah.
So what I want to do is kind of take a step back and really just start from the beginning. And where did you grow up? I know you played a little bit of sports and whatnot, but let's just start from the beginning and go from there.
Yeah. Well, I can actually tie that into my entrepreneurial story, Perfect. Because I grew up in Worcester, Ohio, a small kind of rural community. And grew up, my mom was a newspaper reporter and my dad was an entrepreneur running the family business. So I feel like I finally come full circle by colliding the media business and the newspaper aspect of what I've done throughout my career from my mom, and then the entrepreneurial stuff from my dad. And I mean, it does kind of come back to your roots, I think, a lot. I mean, anybody who does a startup, I think, typically has some of that background, somebody who's been in their life, who's encouraged them to take the leap, to think just differently, and I saw that in the way that both of my parents worked.
So you saw that with your dad and your mom?
And my mom. My mom was very entrepreneurial, even within a big organization.
Yeah.
She basically ran a bureau of the there were 5 counties that this newspaper covered, and she covered the smallest county of the 5, and so it was kind of this black sheep that wasn't as big as the big city,
Yeah.
And she was able to just kind of carve out her territory out there and create a moat around herself, really, that she was able to protect herself. And I really learned a lot entrepreneurially from that. Is like, find your niche, get in there, be super good at it, and build off of that. And that's what you have to do in a startup, is find something small, a nugget, protect it, and then build off of that. And so, with my mom, I certainly saw that. And with my dad, the work-life balance of an entrepreneur, I certainly saw that in action, where my dad, watching Ohio State Buckeyes game on the weekend, had his pads of paper out in front of him and was writing bills or doing something related to the business always.
So what business was that?
He ran a car dealership, so he sold a weird mix: American Motors, Renault, and International Harvester trucks. So it was kind of a wild mix of automobile
I'm
activity.
guessing most entrepreneurs that are watching this don't even know.
Yeah, exactly. They're all brands that have kind of headed into the sunset, if you will. But then actually, I learned something else from my dad, in that he was probably in his mid-50s and decided, hey, the truck and car business isn't great, and the automobile business was going through all sorts of tough times, and he decided to get out and sell the family business that we had been in our family for 40, 50 years, and decided to pivot, basically, and say, hey, I'm going to go do something new with my life, and taught himself to become a financial planner. Opened up a new
50 years old.
At 50,
awesome.
50, 55, and decided to go in a completely different direction and set up another small business, and was successful with that. And so I learned a lot from that, certainly too. That it's no matter what point in your life, you can actually change course and do something entrepreneurial. And so I'm very much thankful to my parents for putting a strong base that put me on the path to allowing us to do what has become GeekWire, because without that kind of family support, as you know, you can't do this.
No.
You can't do this at all.
No.
So,
and then in your youth, you played sports. I know you played soccer. So was that the only one, or did you play?
Soccer was the big one.
Yeah.
Soccer was the big one. Yeah. I played a little bit of tennis as well, but was more of a team sport guy, and played soccer growing up through high school and into college. And
did you play at?
Yeah, I played Division III at where I went to school, Gettysburg College, and certainly a lot of lessons from the sporting world into startups.
Yeah, what would you say, like 2 or 3 that?
Oh boy, just learning how to be a part of a team, certainly, especially with team. That's why I mentioned team sports. And it's funny, we've been interviewing people for GeekWire for various positions, and that's one of my interview questions now. It's like, did you play team sports as a kid, or in high school or college, and what did you learn from it? Because I think you need to have that ability to rely on teammates. If you just try to do it all on your own, you're gonna fail. And I don't like playing soccer with that type of player. I like to be the kind of the distributor of the ball and pass and see the field and have a vision for what's going on. score a goal here or two.
Yeah,
you know, that's still important. But that's the type of soccer player I was, and hopefully I can be that type of entrepreneur as well.
Yeah. What I noticed is it's amazing that you also have a leader that can be like the captain, or you have leadership, but you also have teamwork.
Yeah.
And those two combined, I noticed in my life, like that's what taught me a lot of the quality of leadership qualities and that I have right now.
Yeah.
Where that, you know, sometimes you have to be the leader. If you're the CEO, you have to be the leader in the organization, but you also have to delegate. It's just like passing. You also have to like support others. I mean, it's amazing that those lessons can be tied right into.
And also just, and this is something that I got through sports, but also family, just, you know, got to work your butt off. You know, you just got to work hard.
Yeah.
And I think growing up in kind of the Midwest and the family that I came from, there was certainly a hard work ethic. I was never the smartest kid in my class, but but most of the people in my family, my two older brothers, also were very, very hard workers and very determined. Yeah. And so I guess that's another thing that played an impact. And basically my entrepreneurial career is just having older brothers that beat up on me throughout my life, you know, whether in soccer or just take some hits and get back up. Yeah. So that's been part of it, which you got to do in your startup as well. So.
And then, I mean, you spent 10 years or plus, right, at the PI.
Yep. So kind of fast forwarding with the history, I went to Gettysburg College, played soccer there, studied history, came back and worked actually at my mom's newspaper for a year and a half or so. And then I moved out west because one of my older brothers was living out here and just had the desire to get out of Ohio and experience something new. Yeah. So I moved out to Seattle, and I didn't have a journalism job. I just kind of moved out here on a whim, and I had, gosh, probably 8 to 10 jobs in 18 months. I worked at the Harvard Exit Movie Theater. I worked down at Mount Rainier for a while. I had some really crappy jobs too. Yeah. Customer support.
You too.
Yeah, you know, all the crap. And you know, kind of put in my time doing all those things, and eventually got a break to go work at the East Side Journal as a business reporter, which is a daily newspaper out in Bellevue, and went out there and started working there. And about 6 months into my tenure, they said, okay, all of a sudden you're the tech reporter. And I knew nothing about technology at this time, nothing. And I was totally fearful of it, because I was like, you know, it wasn't the world I was coming out of. And over time, I just kind of, I got into it. And I'll trace it back to a guy that a lot of people here in the Seattle tech community know, Craig Sherman, who's a well-known lawyer. He's actually the lawyer for GeekWire now. He had just moved from his established law firm to set up a new law firm called Venture Law Group, which was kind of this big Silicon Valley, late 90s kind of powerful firm and they were coming into Seattle, and I found that really interesting that they were setting up a branch office in Seattle. And I talked to Craig, and I really liked him, and I thought he was just so smart. And I said, Craig, what are you guys doing up here? And he said, well, we're going after the startup market. And I was like, really?
This was what year?
So this was probably 98.
You hit it at the right time.
Yeah, it was right before the dot-com boom era, and I was like, wow, startups, that's kind of cool, and it just sounded really interesting, and I didn't know much about startups, but it was a way for me to do tech reporting in a more interesting way, that you could get in and learn about the entrepreneur, learn their stories, find out their struggles, rather than trying to cover the earnings release from Microsoft or whoever. You know, that wasn't as interesting to me. Or try to say what the next great technology was coming out of Microsoft. I was more interested in the early stage,
emerging.
They're great stories there. I mean, there's the story of,
as you can see, there's energy.
There's energy and there's passion, and you get to talk to the founder, which is cool because you get to hear that firsthand. And so those types of stories just appealed much more to me as a reporter. And so shortly after joining the East Side Journal, I kind of did my own pivot in my journalism career. I was like, because I had the opportunity to cover the big dogs of technology, I was like, I'm not gonna, and this is kind of going back to my mom and creating a moat. I was like, I'm not gonna carve any new territory there. It's not, there's nothing there for me. I'm competing against everybody, but I'm seeing this new thing emerging, and gosh, there are these Silicon Valley firms that are moving into town. There's something going on here. And so really just kind of immersed myself into the startup world, and that was kind of the nugget of how I got onto the beat that I have today, which is covering startups, early stage venture capital, entrepreneurial activity, was kind of tracing itself back to some of those initial conversations I had with Craig Sherman, but also recognizing there was an opportunity to cover a community that was just starting to emerge here. And I got in early and kept at it. You know, I'm obviously here, 15 years later or so, and I'm still essentially covering the same thing. But yeah, there was a long tenure there at the Seattle PI,
so
where I was a technology reporter.
I'm curious, given the entrepreneurial roots and like, you know, the things that you just talked about, but you spent, I would consider at least a chunk of time at the PI. Did you want to start something early on your own, or did you feel like you needed to like spend some time with an established company?
Yeah, I didn't want to start something early on. I really enjoyed working at a newspaper. As I said, it was kind of in my DNA and my blood from my mom. And newspapers are a fun environment. I mean, some of my closest, dearest friends are still back to those Seattle PI days. Newspaper people are a rare breed, and they're fun. And I like hanging out with newspaper people. They're well informed, smart. They're not intimidated. They you know, there's certain characteristics that I really like about newspaper folks. And so I initially, and there was so much for me to learn, really. I mean, I had to come into this as a newbie and not only learn business, but learn technology. And it took me a couple of years to feel confident enough with myself as a reporter to know that I could tell a good story in this space. That took time.
At that time, were you guys publishing on the web, or was it?
No, gosh, when I started at the PI, I was one of the first reporters to get a PC that had internet access.
No way.
Yes. I mean, they were still on the old mainframe systems. It was old school. And I, you know, because I was on the tech beat, I made the claim that, I at least need to be able to get some access to the internet here.
I'm writing about computers.
Yeah. And so, it was old school. And this is, you know, one of the failings of newspapers really, is that they were very, very slow in making that transition.
Why do you think that is? Not to jump in, but I mean, that has perplexed me, and you obviously have had a more, you know, clearer picture of that. Like, what do you?
Yeah.
Are they just? Is it just that traditional old school thinking that they are having a hard
bit?
Time?
They were monopolies, and they were making money hand over fist, and they got lazy and slow, and they weren't innovative. Yeah. I bet if you went back and looked at the R&D budgets of media and newspaper companies between the glory years of the 80s and 90s, it was probably under 1%, because they were just rolling in it. And they were not innovating. They were not. And then this thing comes along called Craigslist and they start eating away at their profit center. And then other thing, Google comes around, and it just slowly. And then by the time it was, you know, even by the time Todd and I were leaving the PI, which was 2009 roughly, I don't think people had awoken to the fact that this internet thing was completely
were you guys, like,
real.
Trying to pull them?
I mean, you know, to fast forward on our own story of how we got to where we are today, Todd and I essentially, we had a fully baked business plan that we went to the PI with to do what essentially became GeekWire. Because we had made even though I was not online initially, eventually Todd and I very much went online, and we were very aggressive in our coverage online, because we were competing against bigger organizations, and it was one way for us to compete, was we could compete online where we couldn't compete in the newsprint. And so we made the conscious decision, both of us independently, that we were going to create blogs, and we were going to, you know, really cover the heck out of our beats online, and that's where we were going to put our stake in the sand. And it was smart to do, but it was almost out of desperation, frankly, because we couldn't compete with the bigger staffs of our rivals, and so we said, this is a place we can compete, and there are no bounds. You know, you're not bound by how big the news hole is in the printed product each day. You know, it's basically free game, and we liked that, and we were able to run with it. And because of that, Todd and I both were able to create large enough communities around our own coverage areas. Todd on Microsoft and myself on the startup venture capital beat, and we smartly, if not, you know, haphazardly, named our blogs Todd Bishop on Microsoft and John Cook on, John Cook's venture blog. Were the two names, and it was around our names. So every time we've leapt, you know, to different places throughout our careers, we've taken our names with us, and so the community has followed along with us. So, but yeah, back to the newspaper question of why they didn't make the transition. I think they were monopolies, sat on their lead, and you had people in management that were not innovative, creative thinkers who wanted to break things. I mean, because at a startup you got to go in and break stuff.
Yeah.
And you had more established people that were running these organizations that had been, who are good people and smart people, but they'd just been in these organizations for so long that they weren't. It's it's the innovator's dilemma. They weren't going to break apart the traditional newspaper. And I remember going to some of the management at the PI and saying at the time, are you ready to make the physical newspaper worse? Because that's what you have to do in order to survive. You gotta put 80% of your resources online and 20 into the physical paper. And it was probably 90% going to the physical paper and 10% online.
Jeez.
And I was like, you gotta flip that.
Yeah.
If you have any hope to make this leap, you gotta flip it. And that's a hard sell.
So one thing that I've thought about is, if you think about that industry, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's such an old industry that the executives that are running these companies, they're not innovators in the general sense. They've just it's a business that's been around for 100 years.
Yeah, and it had operated very much in the same way for a long time, and they thought they were going to roll with it on that way. And
so it doesn't surprise me when the industry got hit to a point where they're going down because their innovation is not in their blood, and they can't even actually get to the point where they're evaluating the 90-10 or 80-20, 90-10.
I don't even think they could get to that point. That said, if they even got to that point, there's no guaranteeing that they actually would have been successful, because there's a whole legacy business there that they had to somehow transition. You see media companies going through this to this day. So you see a lot of newspaper companies that are now shedding their print product or reducing the number of days that they're distributing. And I think you're just going to see more of that. I mean, we're in an online mobile world, and I don't think my son, who's 3.5, is going to be. He's going to ask me what a newspaper is. He's going to think it's the weirdest thing that I work for this thing called a newspaper that delivered a printed copy of something with information in it to people's doorsteps every morning.
Where's the links?
Yeah, it's going to just seem so foreign to him.
So what's crazy is it's like in your rearview mirror now. I mean, you're just like,
It was in my rearview mirror when I was at the PI, frankly. I would moved on. I mean, the thing was, I was covering a lot of startups in the media space, and I was covering where the money was flowing, and my readers had already made the migration, and my readers I thought were the early adopters because they were more plugged into technology, and I was like, okay, that's just going to happen with all readers in every segment, and it has certainly. And there are certainly a lot of problems and things to fix in the media business in the online world, and that's not that's a tough business still as well. We're not out of the woods at GeekWire. That said, I'm very happy I made the transition and leap out of that world.
So let's talk about
on my own terms rather than somebody else's terms.
So as Founders Draw is really just about the leap and about the stuff, and it's not easy. So describe your experience thus far. It's been what, 2 years?
About a little more than 2 years.
Yep. And how would you describe it?
Oh God, it's been great. I mean, I thank you so much for the kind words that you began the program with, because I think that emboldens us as entrepreneurs. We hear this a lot from people in the Seattle tech community, that they feel a connection to our business and what we're doing and what we're doing to elevate the discussion of the tech community here. And so it's a really great feeling for us to have so many people throughout the community, whether they're giving us a guest post or coming out to our events or posting a comment on a story, that feel engaged and attached to what we're doing. And so that part of what we're doing is just it's gratifying, and we're just thrilled that so many people have tuned in and feel like what we're doing is of value. And so we have just been on a rocket ship ride from day one. I mean, we launched our site in a weekend. We initially thought we were going to delay our launch and have a gap of a week or two, but we decided, hey, let's just go for it. We worked with our developers, and we got our site up in a weekend, and we launched on that Monday, awesome. The day we basically signed our legal papers with Craig Sherman. And so it's been running fast and furious and not looking back, and trying to build a strong community.
Was there ever a point where you're like, oh shit, like I don't know if this is gonna work?
Not a point that I've felt, you know, knock on wood,
Yeah.
that were there, that it wasn't going to work. No, not yet. And you know, that point may still be ahead of us. But I've been really thrilled with kind of the partners that we've had around us, and you know, I must say we have had a great chairman and co-founder really in Jonathan Spazzato, who's a well-known entrepreneur here in Seattle, who's provided the seed funding to get GeekWire off the ground, and you know, that has given us a little bit of a cushion. We didn't raise a ton of money, but we raised, you know, enough to get us going and give us some runway, and that's been great. And so we've been able to you know, prove out the model here in the first 2 years, and we've had, you know, the first 6 months here of 2013, we've been profitable as a business, and you know, hopefully this is going to be our first full year of profitability, and we can continue to build on that and grow. You know, and we're trying to do it in a bootstrappy style. I mean, we're trying to use our profits to reinvest back into the company and not go out and raise a $2 or $3 or $5 million round of funding, and that's a little bit hard. Is that you know, a lot of our competitors are doing that. Yeah. In the business we're in, I have a really hard time seeing where the big return is on some of those businesses. So we've tried to keep it pretty lean and just run the business off of its profits. That's awesome. And that's what we're hoping to do going forward. And we'll see. We may come across some great big opportunity that is worth a bigger investment, and we'll take a look at that if that opportunity arises. But we've got a lot of things percolating right now. If you could break it down into like 2 to 3 things that you feel you made right decisions, and those were the decisions that probably determined the positive experience. Like, is there 2 to 3 things that you see that? Oh boy, yeah, it's a combination of a lot of things. I think our speed to market was smart. Yeah. I think we launched quickly, and we caught the community buzz around what we were doing. I think going back to Todd and I always branding around our personal names was really smart. That when we said, hey, we're at GeekWire now, we've got a new thing going, people follow. Yeah, day 2 of GeekWire, people are on GeekWire. Yeah. And you know, our traffic actually has exceeded our expectations. Awesome. In terms of where we're at these days, and so I think that was really smart for us to just brand around our own personal names and personal brands, and having that trust with the community, and knowing that you know, we sometimes tell the bad and ugly parts of the community, and not everyone likes to hear that, but I think there is a strong trust in the type of reporting that we're doing at GeekWire. And Tom Hughesby, a local venture capitalist in town, also I've heard him speak many times, and he's a very colorful fellow. And he has said, if you just hang around long enough, you're in the game, and you're there, and that's sometimes all it takes. And Todd and I've hung around for a long time in this community doing this, and so I think that's part of it. I would go in addition to that. Excuse me. In addition to that, I would say that it's getting the right people around you, and I've noticed you guys do that very well. I think. I mean, at a certain point, you do have to pull in like Jonathan or, you know, Rebecca, or just like, you either get the right people around you or you don't. Yeah. And that's what I've noticed with you guys is, and in any successful startup is, regardless if they're media or not, it's like you just put the right pieces together, and after a while, it's just gonna like. Yeah. Hopefully, you know, new things generate once you just get smart people in a room doing interesting things, and I do believe in that. You know, at our core, we're very much a journalistic and editorial enterprise, but you see kind of offshoots of what that is that are different than what you see in a traditional, like your events. Events, stuff, right? Perfect example. Events is a big part of what we do, and you know, we'll do about 12 or 13 in 2013, which is a lot for a small staff like ours. But yeah, I didn't know, you know, 5 years ago when I was itching to go and do the leap into online journalism that I'd be running an events company, but essentially I am. But that's a big part of what we do. We just launched a new site called GeekWork, which is a marketplace for basically job seekers and employers, and trying to make that connection happen in a more interesting way. And so that's a big piece of it. We have a membership program which is also very much tied into our events. And so we have these little attachments on the side of our main editorial focus at the core, and we're always looking at other little things to add that are revenue generators. So what's the vision? I mean, where do you feel like you guys are going? Yeah, I mean, we want to create the most important technology news site on record that's based and rooted out of Seattle.
Nice.
And we have no shortage of competition when it comes to technology news.
Yeah.
People have a lot of choice in the matter.
You're right.
We feel as if we come at things a little bit differently, in part because of where we're from, in part because of the historical reportage that we've done over the years, and that has rooted us to this place. And so we think Seattle deserves an awesome technology news site, just as Silicon Valley's got, half a dozen to probably 2 dozen of these, and New York's got its fair share, and Boston has its fair share.
Well, if you think about it, it's, you guys are kind of lucky to have. I mean, you're the big guys already in Seattle.
It's part of that moat. That going back to what my mom did. I felt like Seattle was kind of that outlying county.
Yeah.
We were in Wayne County, Ohio, a rural big dairy county, and occasionally there was some big story that popped out of there. But my mom owned that county.
Yeah.
She knew everybody in that town. She knew everything happening, and people would turn to her to get the information. And we want to essentially be the same kind of nexus point in the. We think this is a bigger community than Wayne County, Ohio, in terms of if you own the Northwest Technology Hub and be that nexus of information and events and the cross-pollination that happens at events. That's kind of what we want to be at our core. And that's who we are.
That's awesome.
We also feel as if the tech community's changed a lot here in Seattle. 5 years ago, I didn't think Google was going to be a huge presence in Seattle, and they are now. I mean, they're doubling their staff. They're going to have more than 2,000 people here. Google's essentially a Seattle tech company now, and so now we have to cover Google. If you're covering Google, you got to cover everything obviously going on at Microsoft and Amazon, and if you're covering everything going on there, you got to cover everything at Apple. So essentially, the way the tech community has evolved in Seattle, you almost have to be in everything, because now you have all these tech titans from Silicon Valley that have set up important engineering centers here. Most recently, I just did a story on Groupon. I was shocked. I went into Groupon's offices down in Pioneer Square, and they have 130 people there.
That's crazy.
I was like, and they had 0 18 months ago.
Yeah.
0 to 130 people. Groupon, and I was like, whoa. That's crazy, and they're running out of space, and they're looking for more.
Like they're busted.
And so to me, I mean, that's a fascinating story. Why here? What does that mean for the business? And so, this is a really amazing hotbed to be in and to be a reporter, because there are stories like that are just kind of pop out at you.
How do you handle? What I've noticed in the media industry is, it's obviously there's a lot of page views and the business model of advertising and whatnot. How do you not fall into the trap of just writing the same story that you name the blog also has?
Yeah.
That's tough, right?
It is tough, and it's something we do balance on a daily basis. We have to judge, as we've always judged throughout our journalism careers, whether it's a story that matters for our community.
Yeah.
So we'll do what's in the industry parlance known as aggregation on occasion, where we will aggregate or take another story and we'll piece it together in such a way that it becomes ours. That said, Todd and I have reported on a lot of these companies for so long that typically, even when we do aggregate a story, we can add additional context or information into it that makes it more interesting, I think, to our readers.
Yeah.
So that's one piece of it. And we do just chase that if it's important to our community. But the things that get us most fired up, frankly, are when we're going out and doing original reporting, whether we're covering on an event that's happening here in Seattle and we can be the guys in town that are there covering it, or just digging through court records or SEC filings, and we do that. We dig through stuff, and we like that. I mean, that's kind of the traditional boots on the feet, boots on the street reporting that Todd and I grew up in, and it's just traditional beat reporting, and that's part of our DNA, and that's not going away.
Good.
We love that. That's what gets me most excited. Is I still get excited when I come across a new funding announcement and an SEC filing that nobody else has heard of, and I've discovered a new company. I get a little fire in my belly.
Yeah.
And I've done it for 15 years now, and I still like that. So that's very much a part of who we are.
Yeah.
And I think you can chase the almighty page view. And hey, we have fun on the site, and we occasionally do that. We like to do some things that are a little offbeat and off the wall. which some might say, hey, it's just link bait. But at the end of the day, we like to have a mix of coverage, and we like to surprise our readers occasionally. We want people to come back and say, what's GeekWire talking about? I wonder what's on GeekWire. And have people get angry at us as they do. Like, why is this on GeekWire? This doesn't have a place. And so...
so it sounds like you're just wrapping in your personality and your culture into your product, which in reality, that's how you differentiate. Because what I'm seeing is most are, if they're just doing, link bait, or they're just covering the major story of the day, there's no
real value. There's not. Yeah. There's no value. There's no personality. There's no analysis on top of that, which we like to provide on occasion. And so I think that's what sets us apart. Now, this is what's interesting in the whole media model right now. We don't know which way that's going to play out, because it could continue to go down the path of those kind of link bait sites, and that's all they are the ones that grab all page views and ad dollars, and that's that. We've had a decent amount of success that I hope that we can prove that, hey, something of a higher quality can actually be successful.
Well, and I think if you see that change, it's just stepping back and realizing and thinking about, like, what are we really doing here? Like, are we just going to, like, write the same story that literally you could find on TechCrunch, you name it?
Yeah, we don't like that. No. At the end of the day,
it's about
at the end of the day, we don't want to be chasing everybody. We want other people chasing us, or we want to just be doing something totally different and unique that people are questioning what we're doing. I'd rather be unique and out of the box and weird than I would just be another clone site of somebody else. And I don't think you can make the argument that GeekWire is a clone site of anything, in part because we're so rooted here and we're out covering the community. We are going to the courts or going to local events. I mean, local events is a great source of interesting content for us. And also welcoming people into from our community onto GeekWire to write for us and say, hey, we've got a viewpoint and opinion, and I want to share something with you guys. And we love that. We love that. If it's of a high enough bar and high enough quality, we certainly will put it out there for our community to digest. So that's how we keep it original, which I think is your question.
So you're obviously getting into events and stuff. Where's the line? Because you can't go too far, you can't spend too much money, you can't. I don't know. Like, is there a line that you would draw, or like?
Line in terms of whether we can continue to do as many events, or
what the business becomes.
I think we're about at that line, frankly, in terms of how many events we can do, because events are hard. They don't scale particularly well. We love them because they are the real world manifestation of GeekWire. We get our community together to have fun, talk, find out who else is doing interesting things in the community. So I think we had over 800 people at our GeekWire Awards this year at the EMP. And we'll have probably 600 plus at the GeekWire Summit, which is coming up on September 12th, which is an all-day conference, probably our heaviest content event of the year, and we've got great speakers lined up for that. And those things are hard to put together, and they take a lot of time, and they take a lot of our personal attention to make them successful. And so I think you probably won't see us scaling those out too many more in 2014. But who knows? Who knows what we're going to do next in terms of the next hire for GeekWire. We're still in the position of trying to figure that one out. Yeah, we're at a really, really interesting point in the business right now, where I think we've gotten through that 2-year bootstrapping phase. And
you're now emerging.
And now, now we're like, okay, we've done that. We've gotten some of our first profits into the business, and now we're trying to think, okay, where do we go next, and where do we invest, and where do we double down? And so that's just an interesting place to be. That's a lot different than being in the first 3 months where you're just trying to tell the world who you are and that what your product is. And so we've come a long way, and I think we've got a lot of ideas and a lot of exciting things in the hopper of what we're going to do. Events are going to be an important piece always of what we do, but in terms of really supercharging that, I think we want to supercharge our existing events that we do and make them bigger and better, rather than roll out carbon copies of them. At least that's what we're thinking now.
So I want to switch gears a second. You're obviously covering successful people, you're covering successful startups, and then some of them that you do cover kind of fall off and you don't cover them anymore. So
yeah,
there's certain things that successful founders are doing. Can you sum that up at all based on your perspective?
Yeah, gosh, I mean, there's so many examples. I think back to companies that have actually moved from the startup phase to, you know, pretty large organizations here that I've covered the entire trajectory, and I'm thinking back, like, what made them successful? So, you know, companies like Zillow and Tableau, which I was one of the first reporters to ever cover either of those companies. I mean, I'm dating myself here that, you know, two companies that have gone public recently are like, I was covering them when they were just little seed stage companies, which makes my job pretty interesting. But if I look back at those two as examples, and I start to think about pulling lessons out of those founders who were there, gosh, there's so many. I think hitting on what I was talking about a little bit earlier, Christian Chabot at Tableau, he was a guest of ours at one of our meetups that we had.
Interviewed him.
Yeah, back in February here of this year. And he's just such an inspiring entrepreneur, and you know, he was also of this belief, you know, just stick around. You gotta, I think he used the term supernova. Tableau was not a supernova like a Twitter or an Instagram. It took 10 years to build that business, and they had a vision and they stuck with it, and they kept plodding along, and they hung in there.
Yeah.
And here they are, a $3 billion plus market value company, and so. It is one of the great things about my job is that I get to go out and interview these people or talk to them and pull lessons from these people into my own startup that I get to think about. Yeah. And so I've been touched and influenced by hundreds of entrepreneurs over the years, some who've been successful, some who've not been successful, so I've got to learn from both. In the case of Zillow, I think, you know, as you were touching on earlier, team certainly is super important. Yeah. They've been able to retain a very strong management team there, and I think a strong culture that's provided them with a lot of success. And just thinking creatively about how they're monetizing their business. But even as I was describing GeekWire in terms of that whole, you know, that editorial component that's at our core, I think of an interview that I had back with Spencer Roscoff of Zillow, the CEO, where he describes Zillow's living database of homes. They're, you know, coming to their site and seeing every home property on in the U.S. essentially. That's their core. But then they have these offshoot businesses. That's and so I guess in some way, I'm trying to replicate that in a very minor way of what we're doing at GeekWire. And so there are all sorts of those influences that have played a part in how we've started GeekWire that come through the transom just from our own coverage. No, so that's pretty. It puts us in a pretty unique position because of that.
Well, it's funny. Like, I mean, I kind of stepped back recently, and I just thought about you, and you should absolutely take advantage of that. And if you have your ears and eyes open, you know, there's no reason that you can't learn from every single person that you're talking to or writing about.
I do. That's what I love about my job. I get educated. If I'm doing my job right, I get educated every day. And especially one of the things I love, and I've mentioned a couple times here, are the guest posts that run that are related to entrepreneurial activity. Now that I'm an entrepreneur, I read those with such a different lens and an interesting perspective. Like, I take things out of them, and I'm emailing back with some of the CEOs or founders and saying, gosh, this was a really interesting nugget. I'm dealing with the same thing. Yeah. And so it's that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool, because I think that just puts us in a really interesting position.
The reason why I touch on it is because I think it's easy as a founder, and especially if you're CEO, but regardless of what your position is, you get so heads down and you don't like maybe pay attention to some of the things that you're actually being exposed to. And
and I fall into that trap too, where I probably could consume more of it, you know, and suck in more of it. But the stuff I do pick up that sticks with me must really resonate and stick with me. But so the biggest lessons are just kind of there and hang around.
So turning the tables a little bit, what is there some things that you see that founders are doing that they should actually avoid, like making mistakes, probably as first-time founders? From your perspective?
Yeah, you know, there are the kind of the classic ones of raising too much money. That can be a trap that you fall into. That's, you know, and I think you see that manifesting itself in GeekWire and why we've tried to keep things pretty lean and how we've done things. So raising too much money is certainly a trap you can fall into. I think that if you can keep it lean and bootstrap it and really test out the ideas and theories and try to make them work, I mean, I really believe that's the way to go. Other faults and traps that I've seen founders make. Gosh, I've seen a lot of things blow up that are pretty nasty from nasty things, and those bad ones seem to sit and resonate in my mind more than just the common mistakes.
A lot, very often is co-founder issues, or like just not getting along.
That happens
Teams
a lot.
blow up.
Yeah, team, it's huge, and I think this is one of the things with GeekWire and Todd and I that have worked together for 10 plus years now, and we know each other really well. And that's not to say we don't clash heads on occasion. We do, like any co-founders do. But at the end of the day, Todd and I very much kind of have a similar vision of what we're doing and where we're going, and we bring complementary skills to the table. So I think that matters too. If you have two founders who are really different, and Todd and I are really different.
So you're saying it's almost opposites or a lot?
It's good. I think it's good if the two founders can be different enough, because there's so much to do in a startup. So taking our own, for example, I'm more of kind of the marketing, public outreach, community builder guy, making sure that the startups in town know who we are and are participating and are coming out to our events and that kind of stuff. And Todd's doing a lot of the blocking and tackling on the back end as it relates to the operations of the site, like things you're not even seeing. He's much more technical than I am.
Okay.
He's much more technical, and that's good because he can problem solve and tinker and fix some things on the back end of the site, which would take me hours to figure out. And so in that, I guess that's kind of how I see how we're very complementary.
Yeah.
And we need each other. We need, and I think you need that in a startup. You need a founder that you can rely on to go to fix something that you're not as strong at.
Are your personalities quite different as well?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, I think I'm more outgoing and he's more reserved. Yeah, certainly.
And it works.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, and that's why I'm probably more public facing than he is.
Yeah.
But he's on the radio. He loves doing radio, and he's great at radio. He's got a great radio
voice. Yeah, he has a radio show.
Yeah, and we do our radio show. But he loves that part of the job. He takes the lead. That's a great way of how we divide too.
Just balancing.
He actually takes all the lead on doing our radio show, and I have a few touch points here and there, but not many.
Yeah.
He runs that essentially, and I kind of show up and hopefully add a little bit of comic relief here and there, and that's kind of my role. But yeah, I think that's important, is to have a team where the founders can divide and conquer at the end of the day. If you have two founders that are both, let's say, super technical and they're trying to figure out the same issue and they have very different views on that, I could see that causing some
It's just
strife.
a lot of headbutting.
Yeah.
I mean, what I've experienced, me being non-technical as well, is it's nice because you can just let them, that's their domain.
Yeah.
And I trust the decision that the CTO or the technical lead is going to make, as opposed to me butting heads what are you talking about? Why are we doing that?
Yeah.
That's just it gets you nowhere.
Yeah.
Just waste time.
Yeah, and that's where conflict can arise, I think, in a startup, and where problems can arise. So, at the end of the day, it's kind of overused, but team does really matter, and the personalities you have around the table really do matter.
Yeah.
And so you need to make sure that those personalities all mesh and everybody's adding value in different parts of the business.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're wrapping up here.
All right. Thanks, Nick. It was really fun. Thanks for the beer.
Cheers.
All right. Cheers.